And at this time, I would like to introduce you to Christina, your moderator today. Christina, the floor is yours.
So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to join us for today's session. We're very excited that we have over 1,000 people registered for today's session on improving your analytical skills. For those of you who are returning to Canadian Management Centre in our webinar series, welcome back. And for those of you who are new to us, Canadian Management Centre is a national organization focused on providing professional development support to individuals and organizations across the country. And we offer a number of different open enrollment programs and customized solutions to support our clients, as I said, in a number of different topic areas, ranging from communication and interpersonal skills to management and leadership to strategic management and many more. Today's session was scheduled based on demands that we've seen from our clients to focus on the topic of analysis and improving your analytical skills, and we're seeing a growing interest in this area, so we wanted to offer a session that would give you some practical tips that you can take away back to your workplaces to make a difference in your roles. If you are participating in today's session and are on Twitter, you can see our handle up on the screen in front of you, which is @CanadianManagement, and you can tweet out today using the hashtag CMCEvents to join in on the conversation that may be happening online. After today's session, you will receive an email with a link to a recording of the webinar. This will give you the option to be able to view a visual of the slides as well, so you do have that option available in terms of follow-up from us. Now, given that we have a lot of content to cover, I don't want to take up too much time speaking and to get right into our session by introducing our facilitator for today's session, Salima Valji. Salima is a CMC facilitator and has been with us since 2011. And prior to joining us as a facilitator, she has brought over 15 years of experience working as a marketing executive for a number of major firms, and is an accomplished facilitator and consultant who's passionate about helping people and teams realize their full potential. Salima specializes in leadership and personal effectiveness and actually is the facilitator who delivers our Improving Your Analytical Skills program and brings a lot of great experience from her own background, but also in the work that she does with individuals in the organizations that we support. So Salima, welcome to you today, and I will pass the floor over to you so that we can get started.
Great. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Christina. I'm very excited to be here with everyone on this webinar to share with everyone a process in terms of how you can improve your analytical skills. From my work experience, I personally firsthand have experienced the value of this. I'd like to start off today with talking about the challenges that I have come to realize and seen by facilitating and meeting with clients. And one of the most common complaints I hear from leaders is that they don't have enough time. So what ends up happening is we look for shortcuts. And as you can imagine in today's market, not having enough time could be a recipe for disaster. So businesses today are rapidly evolving to keep up with the rate of globalization, new technology, and increasing competition forces. So today, to compete, companies today are often spending their time looking to understand what consumers would like, to understand how to better serve existing partners and get the most from employees, to deal with the expectation to respond quickly and immediately. So it's no wonder that many people feel overwhelmed with the expectations of work. Technology has allowed us to keep pace with some of that change because it enables us to gather information quickly and store huge volumes of information so that it can be used to inform the business at every level, from strategy to individual contributor actions. Making this connection, however, depends on having strong ties from the system to the people and requires the skills of the people using the information to make these decisions. In other words, we need to know what to do with all that information that exists within our business today, get comfortable with it, and understand how to action it. So now you're probably asking, how do we take this vast amount of information to make it work for our business? Developing your analytical skills can help you uncover relevant information, assess patterns, and identify opportunities and minimize risk. When you're clear on the information you have, you can also identify and seek out the information you need. Doing so will put you in a stronger position to clearly communicate your recommendations and to make decisions that are in the best interest of your business. Competitive and performance pressures are increasing the sense of urgency for better analytics. There's no better time to amp up your skills. So in today's webinar, we're going to explore the following. We'll learn how to turn information overload into a focused analysis, know whether you're asking the right questions to get started, understand how to plan your analysis to save time and get better results, and learn how to leverage the data you have to build a persuasive business case. So we're going to take a quick pause here, and we're going to get some feedback from everyone on the webinar, and I'll turn it over to Christina to start our first poll.
Thanks, Lima. So we are going to open up a poll on the right-hand side of your screens, and we're asking you the question, how confident do you feel in your analytical abilities today? So if you take a look at the poll, you have the option of selecting very confident, somewhat confident, and not confident. And we think that this will just help give us a gauge of, how we're all feeling for those of us who are participating today in terms of where we're at with our level of confidence. And for those of us who might be very confident, it could be that you just haven't had the right opportunities to be able to apply the skill and you're looking to hone it a little further. And for those of you who are not confident in that range, it could be that you're looking to get some specific tips and suggestions on how you can continue to build some practice and to get some opportunities for you to apply your analytical skills. So take a minute to answer the poll, and we'll share the results back with you so that we have a sense of where we're starting today. But we're also interested in getting some comments from you in the chat panel to tell us what some of your frustrations are with analytical skills. So if you go into the chat panel once you've finished submitting your poll results and click on the option to send to all panelists, we'll be able to see some of your feedback that we can share back with the rest of the group so that we've got an idea of some of the themes. So Jess, I'm going to ask you to just wrap up that poll if you wouldn't mind, just so that we can get a sense of the results that we have from those participating today. And again, we were just looking to get a baseline measurement on how confident we're feeling in terms of our analytical abilities today. And I think today might be an important question because on some days you may feel confident and on other days maybe less so. So Jess, if we could just close out the results. So it looks like the majority of people participating today, 71% ranged themselves at somewhat confident, very confident at 17%, and not as confident at 10, Salima.
Okay, that's great. Well, I'm confident that through this webinar, we're going to be able to by sharing the process with you today, we're going to be able to give you a bump in performance and hopefully move you up from somewhat confident to giving you the tools so that you can move yourself to very confident. Great. So today we're talking a lot about analysis, and sometimes this word analysis can kind of take a lot of work, effort, and brain power. We perform analysis all the time, even when we're not aware of it. So let's start by reviewing what are analytical skills. So analytical skills means to have the ability to use information to make effective decisions. So this involves establishing a plan for gathering data, finding meaning in that data, and making decisions that have an impact on the business. In other words, it's a process of transforming information into knowledge. And to do this, you do this by managing information overload into a manageable plan with a focused analysis. You do this by asking the right questions from the right people. And you do this by leveraging the data you have to make informed decisions or to build a persuasive business case. So on the screen, what you're looking at is the PAC model, which is made up of 3 stages. So you'll see here it's plan, analyze, and conclude. I love this model because it's a simple, highly effective, and easy-to-use model. Now, using the PAC model provides us a framework for conducting a thorough and meaningful analysis. It also helps you to ensure that you have the right focus and spend your energy and time on actions that will lead you to success. Like anything in life, when working without a plan, you could chase many ideas and have a less direct connection to the business goals themselves. So this framework ensures that focus is in the right direction and aligned to the business. This is the key model discussed within Improve Your Analytical Skills program here at CMC. And during the program, we go through in detail how to execute each of the steps within each of the 3 stages of the plan, analyze, and conclude. So you can see here on your screen that you've got different steps. So under plan, for example, we've got define your purpose, clarify your question, decide on your approach, and create a data collection. Under Analyze, we've got collect and organize your data and evaluate the data. And then underneath conclude, we've got draw conclusions, make recommendations, and reporting your results. So we're going to briefly pause again, and we're going to do another poll, and I'll leave that over to you, Christina.
Thanks, Lima. So, Jess, if we could go ahead and open up the second poll, and what we're looking to ask from you at this time is which phase do you spend most of your time today? So based on the phases of plan, analyze, and conclude that Lima just reviewed with you, where do you find that you're being called to spend the majority of your time? And this doesn't necessarily give us an illustration of where you'd like to spend some of your time, but where you find yourself having to spend your time based on some of the realities that you're facing. So again, on the right-hand side of your screen, just take a minute to respond on whether you're spending most of your time planning, analyzing, or concluding. And while you are responding to that, Selena, some of the responses that people are submitting to us in terms of their frustrations with improving their analytical skills is getting access to the right information, the quality of the data that they may have access to, accurate sources, and then one person commented, making the info simple enough but still meaningful and relevant to their audience. So it'll be interesting to see how we can tie some of those frustrations back to how the PAC model may be able to offer some improvements based on where people are spending their time. So Jess, we can close out the poll now just to get a response to see where the majority of us are spending our time. So we'll just give it another minute just to wrap up, and thanks for all of you who are participating in the chat discussion today. It's really helpful for us to get a sense of what's going on in your world so we can try to make today's session the most relevant for you. So Jess, I'm just waiting for those results to display, and here we go. So 51% of us are spending our time in analyzing the data, 37% are spending the most of their time planning, and 10% spending their time in concluding.
I'm really happy to see that we actually have 37% spending their time in planning. This is the stage of the process where I find that we typically don't spend enough time on, and it can make a really big impact in terms of how our information, how our conclusions can have an impact on the decisions that get made on the other side. So one thing I did want to make note of about the PAC model is that the timing of these steps will vary depending on the analysis and who requested it. So sometimes these steps will be done in a matter of minutes, and sometimes over the course of hours, days, weeks, months, or even longer. So for example, if you've been asked to review a partner's report and conclusion, since the work has already been completed, you won't need to spend a lot of time in the planning stage. However, you'll need to understand their approach and the question the report was centered around, and then you can move on to the analysis stage. So what we're going to do is, on today's webinar, is we're going to go through the different phases, and you can see how you can improve upon in terms of planning and concluding, and as well as analyzing. Okay, so analysis starts with identifying the right question to answer. And so one of the key tools that we use as part of the planning stage in this course is to help define the problem that you will be seeking to understand. This tool, which you see on your screen, is called clarifying the question. So by asking why, who, benefits, issues, the risks, and options, you're clarifying why you're doing the analysis and what is the question that your analysis will answer. So to bring this to life, I want to take you through an example. And so the challenge that we have here is that, let's say, for example, you've just accepted a new leadership position, you're responsible for product development in your organization, and your top priority in this role is to identify new areas for growth. So let's look at that example and see how we can apply the clarifying the question tool to this challenge that you've been presented with. So at the center we have what is the question. So in our example, our central question would be, what are new areas for growth for the business? Why? So what's the root cause of this question being asked? So let's say it's to increase profits. So although sales have increased since 2009, overall sales are lower than what they used to be in 2004 and 2005. Next, we look at identifying the stakeholders and any considerations. So in our example, the stakeholders would be the leadership team, your boss, your peers, and the R&D team. A key consideration would be that since you're new to role, you want to make note to confirm that you've considered all the key stakeholders and that you haven't missed anyone. Next, you look at the benefits. What are the possible positive outcomes to be gained from this analysis? So in our example, let's state that the benefits would be increased sales and profits. So next, you look at the issues. So what are the showstoppers and major issues that need consideration? In our example, a key consideration would be a large investment in R&D for the first 2 years before profits can be realized. Next, we look at risks. What are the risks to avoid? So potential risks that I've identified here in the example is no guarantee that there'll be no guarantee after investments are made that the new growth areas will be profitable right away. And the options. What are some possible approaches to solving the problem? So partnering with R&D partners to decrease time to market or licensing products from product manufacturers are just a couple of possible approaches that I've developed for this example. So what I've done is I've taken you through the clarifying the question tool, and I've gone through all of the questions to help me to become clear on what is it that I'm ultimately answering, to help me plan and ensure that I've got the right approach to answering the question.
One of our participants mentioned not getting the right business issue from the client in advance to build the analysis. So working through this planning model would give you an opportunity to really dig deep on what the specific business issue is. Is that right, Celine?
Yeah, absolutely. This is just a starting point in terms of the questions to ask. And in the program, we actually go into further tools to give you more questions to be able to ask, particularly when you're working with a requester, whether it be a client or a business partner who needs more information. So the more questions that you end up asking, the more insight you have in order to be able to truly understand what's the root of the problem, what's the true question.
And I guess contexting that for the requester so that they understand that the more time that you can spend in the planning phase clarifying your understanding of what their ask is, the better output you can actually provide to them in terms of an analysis and recommendation.
Absolutely. Great point, Christina. So here we are again at the PAC model. So we briefly looked at the clarifying the question step within the plan phase. So for the purpose of this webinar, we're going to move on to the analysis phase, the analyze phase, okay? And so as part of the analyzing phase, the analyze stage is focused on how to evaluate the data, which is a process of reviewing and studying the data. Ultimately, what you're looking for here are patterns, you're looking for trends, you're looking for commonalities, and any outliers within the data. Okay, so during this program, we reviewed different tools to help you organize your data for analysis and to aggregate unstructured data to help you unlock insights. So charts are just one of the tools that we review in the program. This is a tool that most of you would be familiar with and would likely already be using. Charts are an effective way to aggregate and organize data to be able to draw insights from. So for the purposes of our example that we started off with in the plan phase, the pie chart on the screen helps us to understand, and what it's telling us is that 77% of your company's customers are within the age range of 25 to 55. And the bar chart on the right tells us that category B are the types of products that this customer segment is most interested in. So understanding, being able to read this data, being able to organize it in this format helps us direct us to where we should be looking for further analysis to be able to answer the initial question, which was identifying new areas for growth. So for the purpose of this webinar, we've kept this analysis fairly simple and straightforward to help you illustrate the analysis phase of the PAC model. So during the Improve Your Analytical Skills program, we certainly go through many, many tools to help you with your analysis. So bringing us back to the PAC model, like I mentioned before, we briefly touched upon the plan and the analysis stages of the model. So now the last stage is the conclude phase, which is about drawing conclusions, making recommendations, and reporting your results. So conclusions. Conclusions is really answering the original question. So what does the information tell us? What have we learned from this process? What new information have we learned? What does this all mean? Your conclusion should be clearly resulting from the information. The analysis shows why this has happened. Looking back at our example, we've been working to identify new areas of growth. The analysis showed us that category B are products in demand of the customer base. So the conclusion is that expanding product development within this category results in greater profits. So this leads us to establishing recommendations, which is what you do with this new information. So as part of conclusions, what we want to do is base your conclusions on evidence and reasoning that you've applied. You want to gather the evidence to support your conclusions or findings of your analysis. And you want to be able to finalize the smaller conclusions into a succinct summary as the main conclusion of your analysis. So let's take a look at this further. If we follow the example we've just shared, the expectation of increased profit suggests that you may recommend pursuing product development within category B and perhaps even category C to maximize your return. So the conclusion, and there could be many, enable you to take informed action. So we've got a tool here on our screen which allows you to capture your conclusions and then for you to be able to make a recommendation. And this is an important tool that helps you to articulate what are some of the key conclusions that you've drawn from your analysis to help you to be able to formulate your recommendation and then ultimately to help you in presenting your findings.
Sorry, Salima, we have one of our participants that's asking about looking at qualitative and experiential data, so not just dollars and numbers, but how do you integrate things, I would assume, like customer feedback or experiences that we've had in trying something, or maybe what our competitors might be doing. So how can you integrate qualitative and experiential data into your analysis and ultimately into concluding some of your findings?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're right, the example we looked at was more qualitative, but we do have tools. For example, one of the tools we look at is Affinity grouping, and that is a really effective tool to help us with contextual or feedback surveys where we don't have hardcore facts like dollars or statistics that we can deal with. These tools help us to group the information so that we can draw a conclusion and understand what are some of the patterns. What is this data telling us that we can learn from?
So it's important if you have access to information like that that might influence your analysis and ultimately your conclusion, then you've got to find a way to be able to integrate that into your summary. But to your point, you might be taking this information and I guess categorizing it into some key themes or patterns that emerge.
Yeah, so regardless if you have quantitative or qualitative data, you're using the analysis space to be able to draw the analysis, for you to be able to aggregate it, to be able to organize it. So regardless of the source of the data, the phase still applies.
Okay. So then how does that lead us into presenting your findings? So once you actually have gone through the process to do the analysis and arrive at a conclusion, you've got to share back the results.
Yeah, good point. Oftentimes we find ourselves that we've done all of this work and we've taken the plan and we've put our spreadsheets together and we've done all of our analysis and we think, okay, we've got our conclusion, we're done. But the key point, the key to conveying your analysis is by presenting your findings. And the goal here is to be able to tell a story, to be able to share your recommendations with a senior audience. So here you want to ask yourself, what do I have to do to build the business case? What does my audience already know or don't know or doesn't know? What's compelling to the executives? What's the sense of urgency? What's going to motivate them to act? That's a really important question. And what's my audience's interest and attitude towards the subject? So the tool here, the purpose of asking yourself these questions is to be able to get you to start thinking about what is the key information that I need to include as part of presenting my analysis? What's the story I need to take them through in order for them to act after I've presented the findings? So by thinking through this question, it's going to provide you the insights in how to tell your compelling story that's going to lead to a greater discussion and ultimately for them to take action.
And I guess, Salima, in terms of presenting your findings, we're going to be having to consider the target audience, right? So you're obviously presenting the findings back to the person who may be requesting the analysis, but some of us may find ourselves in situations where we're presenting back to cross-functional groups or we're presenting information back to senior-level executives. So how would you suggest that people work to package the information in a way that's going to be most relevant to their audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. Contextualizing it for your audience, you want to be able to see and understand, are you going to be presenting to all different audiences at once, or are you going to be presenting to different groups? And that's important to distinguish because it tends to be that the more senior audience wants to have the high-level story. And you may find that your peers or more junior reports are going to want to have an understanding of how did we get to this information? What were the questions that were asked? What were the data sources? And there's going to be a lot more questions asked around the analysis And so understanding who your audience is, you want to be able to tailor your report to be able to match what their expectations are going to be in terms of how did you come to this recommendation? How did you come to this conclusion? Who did you work with in order to get to this conclusion? So understanding your audience is going to be really key in terms of packaging that together to present your findings.
And as one of our participants did ask about, the approach to presenting the information. So indicating that senior executives typically have limited time. So this individual provides an executive summary and then moves into providing the data, or should they start with the conclusion to stimulate discussion right away?
Yeah, the typical outline that we use when we're presenting our findings is kind of say, here's what I'm going to tell you what I found, here's what I found, and here's how we came to where we found. So you take them through that story, and you do start off with, here's what the recommendation is, so that we get their attention right off the bat.
And then in so doing, is there an option that you may, or I guess is there a risk that you may start to have people view the analysis with bias based on, your conclusion may be different than what somebody potentially believes that they should do. So we kind of get into the gut instinct findings where there may be some leaders who do make decisions based on gut instinct rather than what the data or information may be telling us.
Actually, you bring up a good point. When faced with individuals who are making decisions based on gut reactions, it's really important to be able to understand where they're coming from and what kind of risk does it pose if the conclusion or the recommendation that you're providing is going to go away from their gut reaction or is going to threaten them in some way, shape, or form, or could potentially harm some additional work that they're doing in a different project. So having that understanding or that lens is really important to understand, because sometimes just presenting data alone isn't enough. So you want to be able to look at the individuals in the room. For example, if you're presenting within a group audience, look at the individuals in the room that would be able to support your analysis and to be able to support that, yeah, this is the right thinking, this is the right way to go. And you also want to be able to be aware of what are going to be some of the political landmines that you could be walking into, because you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. And one way to do that is before presenting into a group, you want to present your data to individuals privately. Get their feedback in advance so that when you are presenting in the group, you've had a chance to collect their feedback and you're aware of and you can expect what some of the discussion is going to be so that your presentation isn't derailed.
That's an amazing suggestion. I think that, we have to factor in the ability to be able to influence and get buy-in from our key stakeholders as well as we go through the process. So I know we're going to transition back into an overview of the PAC model again for our participants. So while we queue that up, I did want to just invite anybody who has any questions for Selena based on the work that you're currently doing or how you're applying your analysis skills to either submit it in the Q&A panel, or you can submit it in the chat panel and just select the option to respond to all panelists, so that way we'll be able to get visibility to your question. So thanks, Selena, for the additional suggestions on presenting your findings. So if we could just take another look back at the PAC model. We had a few people who dialed in a couple minutes behind, so it would be great just to go through a brief overview of the PAC model again and the phases and where you should be spending your time.
Sure. So as I mentioned, 3 stages in the PAC model: plan, analyze, and conclude. Really simple to remember this model. It's quite systematic. And it starts off with the plan phase, which I think is a really important phase. And it tends to be the phase that we tend to skip over. How many of you have oftentimes you've been in a meeting and an issue has aroused, and all of a sudden we go into the brainstorming phase, and we tend to not stop and think about, okay, what really is the root cause here? What really is the issue that we're trying to solve? And we find ourselves in a meeting already talking about, okay, what's the solution? So I find this model is actually really effective in helping us to take a step back, to giving us a formal framework to be able to follow in terms of our thinking. And that's why the plan phase, I find, is to be a really important phase as part of this process, to helping us to define what is the purpose and to clarifying the question. Oftentimes, we may be given a task to say, hey, go and analyze this information. And when we start peeling the layers, when we start to ask more questions, we start to learn and understand, actually, there wasn't really a lot of thought behind this question, or this really isn't the right question that we're looking to analyze. And so by taking the time to do these steps, by taking the time to define your purpose and clarifying your question. And this really will help you to inform in terms of how you're going to decide your approach and create a data collection plan. So oftentimes, if we start with, not oftentimes, but always, by starting with the right question, it's going to lead us to the right analysis. We start with the wrong question, we end up with the wrong analysis. So the plan phase here is really about getting the clarification and making sure that we're starting on the right foot. The analysis phase is really about collecting and organizing your data and evaluating your data. We tend to spend most of our time here. This is really about looking at, okay, what are all the different data sources that we have available to us? What is the information that we need to go out and retrieve, or what is the information that we have at our fingertips that we can actually leverage? And so by creating the data collection plan that we talk about in the plan phase, you already have a starting point to be able to understand what are the different pieces of data that I need to collect. Do I need to aggregate different pieces of data from our customer database, from our sales database, and from our product database? And then once I piece them together, am I going to be able to come up with the information that I need to be able to answer the question? So the analysis phase is really about understanding and being clear on what's the information that I need to collect. What is the source of information that I need to collect? And how am I going to bring this together? The conclusion phase is then ultimately where you're drawing your conclusions. As you start to go through your data and start putting it into the different tools that you have at your disposal, you could be using bar charts, pie charts. You could be using affinity grouping. You could be using comparison charts. Whatever the tool that you use to be able to present your data and to be able to draw to conclusions quickly, you want to be able to draw and state what your conclusions are one by one, and then be able to group them together so that it can help formulate what your recommendation is. Oftentimes, we tend to skip. We tend to go from, here's the analysis, here's what I found out about our market, here's what I found out in terms of the market share, now here's what my recommendation is. And so we tend to skip that step that tends to happen between the analysis and the conclude phase. So you want to get clear in terms of what is going to be the best tool to be able to communicate the conclusion that I've come to. So, for example, a line bar would be something that would be really effective at using to be able to demonstrate an ongoing trend. A comparison chart could be really effective at being able to compare products side by side. So you want to be able to determine and assess what is the right tool that I'm going to be used to help me to evaluate my data, which is going to ultimately be able to help me to come to conclusions quickly. Then moving into the conclusion phase, like we talked about, is about drawing conclusions, making recommendations, and reporting your results. And it's really important here that we step back to our plan phase and we look to what was the original question. Did we, through our analysis, follow suit and go back to our question and really answer on that question? Do we think about the stakeholders and how the results of this information that we've gleaned and the insight we've driven from this information, how is this going to impact our stakeholders? And so the conclusion phase is not just about, okay, what are our conclusions and recommendations, but it's very much about going back to our plan phase and ensuring that we have followed up and we have actually aligned back to the business in terms of the actual ultimate question that we were looking to answer. The conclusion phase also is where we report our results, which was what I was talking about. And this is really about how are you telling your story? How are we actually going to get people to take action on the insights that we've driven? How do we actually get people to pay attention and to go beyond what their gut analysis is? And so oftentimes what I have done is I will state to say, when I started my analysis, my gut was this. But you know what, through the analysis, by looking at the data, it's actually informed me and given me new insights, which has caused me to use my critical thinking skills, which has allowed me to reflect and say, what is the right decision for this business? How have I been able to take these different pieces of data and tie them together for critical thinking and apply them to the business? And so that's what we were talking about earlier in terms of reporting your results and putting it into a presentation that's going to be effective and meaningful, that's going to drive you to meaningful analysis.
Thanks for the summary, Salima. I think that was really helpful just to kind of come back together and take a look at it in a big picture scheme. And we've got some great questions that are coming in from our audience. And one of them is to ask whether or not there's a right or suggested amount of time to spend in each phase when you're approaching an analysis.
You know what, that's going to really depend on where in the process you're starting your analysis. So like as I mentioned before in the example where you may be given completed analysis and you may be asked to say, what's your opinion, what do you think, is this effective? And so you want to be able to think about as well as what's the timeline that you have to be able to deliver this material or to be able to deliver your recommendation. And so as I mentioned before, sometimes the planning phase is the phase where we don't spend the most time. And by spending that information up front, it can reduce the amount of time that we spend in the analysis phase and the conclusion phase. Because I find as even in the poll, we saw the majority of people are spending in the analysis phase. So the objective here for you today is to ask yourself, what could I be doing to spend more time in the planning phase, and what could I do to spend more time in the conclusion phase so that I do justice to the insight and analysis that I have performed and so that I can actually take the analysis into actionable results?
And we've got a question coming in from Chelsea that's asking, how can you be confident in data when you have a small data set? So how can you be comfortable in kind of backing up your data, or I guess in some ways it may be just about creating transparency about the data set that you have available to start giving you some recognition of some preliminary trends?
I think you want to be able to support and be clear in stating that this is a small sample size. You can draw on a third-party resources to be able to supplement your data source, to be able to supplement the data trend that your data is showing, to say that it is in congruence with the third-party data that exists within your market or within your industry.
And I guess on the flip side to that, the question from Donna is, when do we know that we've collected enough data when there's so much information that is available to us? And I guess that's going to tie back into it depends on what you're actually looking for.
Yeah, and that's actually really important, and that's why it's so important that we start off with creating a data collection plan. Because when you skip that phase, what ends up happening is we end up searching and searching and searching for the information that we need. But if we stop at the beginning and say, what is the actual data that we need? You've got a plan set out from the beginning, and therefore you can reflect and look back to say, is this going to be enough information? Often not, we see that we don't actually need reams of information. We don't need significant different sources of information. So it really depends. You want to be able to look at what is the question I'm looking to answer, who are the stakeholders, and how is this information going to be used? But I do believe that using this tool of creating a data collection plan, which is a tool we do cover in the program, can be really helpful in helping you to determine and ensuring that you don't have data overload.
And so a question from Lauren connects back to what you mentioned earlier, Selena, and that when you're working within the PAC model, you could potentially be entering the model at different points or phases. So what if you're brought into the process at the analysis phase? Should you go back and verify that the data being collected is relevant and is in fact the correct data?
Absolutely. I do think it's really important to ask and say, what's the ultimate question that we're looking to answer? You may find by stepping back and asking these questions, you may cause a little friction within the peers or the group that you're working with, but I think it's important to state, hey, I'm just trying to catch up, and I want to get some clarity to make sure I'm clear, what is the question that we're looking to answer? What is it that what's the purpose that we're ultimately driving towards by doing this analysis? And by doing this, you're actually, it's a favor that you'll be doing to everybody else who's been already completing the analysis. And it gets everyone to stop and to reflect in terms of, are we where we said we were going to be? Did we take the plan of action that we said we were going to do? So it's just a quick step in the process to be able to recenter and regroup everybody to make sure everyone's on the same page.
And a question coming in from Mohammed asks about how do we maintain the plan phase while responding to time pressure. So that it's important to spend time at that phase, but people are expected often to turn around an analysis or provide a recommendation in limited time. So do you have any suggestions or recommendations on how people may be able to move through the process quickly?
Yes. Again, we go back to that original challenge which I talked about, which is we're all time-starved, and we're always looking for how can we be the most effective in order to be able to accomplish our tasks. As a result, like I've said earlier, spending the time on the plan phase, spending the time in being clear in your purpose and being clear in your question can help you to reduce your analysis phase, can help you to reduce the amount of time that you're spending on analysis phase, particularly on those very large projects where you're working with different partners, you're working with different stakeholders as part of the overall analysis that you're doing. Being clear at the upfront can be very effective in terms of communicating that across to different partners or different stakeholders and ensuring that as you're going through the analysis, you're keeping on track.
So, clearly we've entered the Q&A phase, and I appreciate everyone actively participating by submitting some of your questions. I just want to remind those of you who haven't had a chance to submit a question that you can do so on the right-hand side of your screen, either through the Q&A panel or through the chat panel by just selecting the option to respond to all panelists. So we have, a question that is looking for a little validation, Salima, and it's coming from Paulina. And she's asking, at which stage would one figure out, 1, what they know for sure, 2, what they think they know, and 3, what they don't know for sure. She's guessing that it's during the planning phase, but wondering if maybe it could be part of the analysis too, since it may be of an iterative nature.
Yeah, absolutely, particularly as you start to learn information, the information that the rest of the organization could shift. So what I mean by that is absolutely you do this in the plan phase. And you want to be clear, and you do this by the questions that you may have of the requester. And as the information within the organization shifts, the answers that you received during the plan phase could very well have shifted as well. So it is important to go back and do this in an iterative process if you feel that the notion and the emotion around those questions that you're asking could have shifted. So absolutely keep it as an iterative process to make sure that you're in check and you're aligned from when you started to the time when you actually conclude and present your findings.
And a question from Christina, not this one, another Christina, who's indicating that she receives dozens of reports that show various depictions of random data, and was wondering what suggestions you may have to make sense of other reports that they're receiving from others. So I guess coming back to the data that you're getting and information that you're getting from others, and any recommendations for how you can make sense of them.
I think what you want to be able to do is you want to be clear on what is it that you want to know. And you want to be able to understand, how am I going to organize this data? So before you start to open these reports and say, okay, what do I do with this information? I think you want to ask yourself and start off by asking, what do I need to know? What is it that I'm ultimately need to answer? What is it that I need to be able to learn or glean from? What insights do I need to derive from before even looking at those reports? Because you're right, they can overwhelm you. And so what I would suggest is take the time to answer those questions. It doesn't, just take a few moments to kind of reflect upon what is it that you need to understand. Then open report number 1 and jot down what are the actual insights or conclusions that you draw upon, or what seems to be the outliers in the data, or what seems to be the patterns. Then open next report and do the same thing. Then open the next report. And again, you're going to stop and reflect and look to see, are there any patterns between these 3 reports that you can start to assimilate? Are there any key outliers, or is this all information that's gobbledygook? And then you want to be able to go back to the individuals that put these data reports together, and to be able to have that conversation to say, hey, I've looked at this product report, I've looked at this category report, and I've looked at this market report, and I'm not clear in terms of how to tie all of this information together. And so can you help me to tie this and to create a story? And so I think it's also important to look at who's developing these reports and what was their rationale or what was their purpose behind putting those reports together, because understanding that can help you to uncover that report doesn't fully answer what it is that you're looking for.
Thanks, Lima. So another question that's come in from Alex is just indicating I'm not able to get buy-in from others even with data. How can I help to influence this? So I guess what suggestions do we have within the PAC model that Alex might be able to use to help get buy-in from individuals?
Yeah, so this is about impact, leveraging your impact and influencing skills. And the way to do this is through knowledge. And what I mean by knowledge is getting the understanding your requesters. What is it that they're looking to do with this information? Why do they need this information? Are they looking to just verify what it is that they already know or think that they know? Are they truly interested in the results? What will happen if they don't accept the data? So by taking the time to communicate with your requester and asking these questions, you're going to be able to be better informed than to be able to apply your impact and influence skills and then be able to understand what is their approach. I mean, there's also the communication approach, which is understanding what their style is. So, for example, if there's somebody who is very direct in their approach, they could very much well be that here's what the recommendation that I'm providing with my, based on the analysis I've provided. Here are a few conclusions that I've drawn based on the information that I reviewed, and that could be enough. And so going down into the deeper level of the analysis could be overwhelming for that type of individual. So you want to look at what is their communication style and how do they take in information, and you want to be able to understand what are the needs of that requester. Is it that they're just wanting to placate and wanting to verify their gut feeling, or are they actually open to the information? So you need to take a little bit of time to dig deeper in order for you to be able to go beyond just presenting data, because when you do this analysis and you're presenting a report, you're not just coming up with some charts and presenting that report. You need to be able to answer the ultimate fears that may be happening in the room.
Great point, Salima. And I guess, depending on the depth of an analysis that you need to do, the number of resources that are being allocated to it. Earlier you mentioned this planning tool to go through and get specifics from your requester on what it is that they're actually looking to achieve. Would it be fair that once you actually, I'd say, do some of that within the planning phase, kind of an analysis, a needs analysis on what it is that they're looking for, would it be fair to go back to your requester to summarize the direction before you actually move into the analysis phase?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a great checkpoint. If you have that opportunity and if there is time, absolutely. That's a very good suggestion.
Okay. And so a question came in from Angela asking about the affinity grouping approach that you mentioned earlier when it comes down to the analysis phase and how we're actually using the data. So could you take a couple moments just to review affinity grouping again?
Sure. So affinity grouping, it's a technique that's used to aggregate segments based on common characteristics that define them. So this is often what we use for qualitative data and can be often used when we're doing interviews, focus groups, or surveys, product reviews, or even tweets that can be organized using affinity grouping. So an example of where I've used this is, for example, based on surveys, you've got information around product needs or product information. And in order for you to be able to identify the trends, you want to be able to, for example, oftentimes what we've done is we've taken those answers, we've put them on sticky notes, one answer on each sticky note, and then we start to put those sticky notes and group them together so we can start to see what are the affinity groups so that can start to bring about the trends that exist amongst all of the answers that you received in that feedback or in that survey that you received. So the affinity grouping helps you to sift through large volumes of data, and it helps you encourage new patterns of thinking, and it's really good oftentimes for when you're brainstorming, or it can be good for process improvement even.
Great. So Raj has asked us a question about the difference between critical thinking and analytical thinking, because you mentioned earlier needing to, I guess, draw on your critical thinking skills as well. So how would you differentiate between critical thinking and analytical thinking?
So analytical and critical thinking are two styles of thinking that are commonly used. And I would say that analytical thinking describes a thinking style that enables a person to break down complex information or a series of comprehensive data. So it uses a step-by-step method to analyze a problem and then come to an answer solution. So similar to what we provided in the PAC model. Very systematic, and it's an analytical thinking that allows you to go through step-by-step process. So critical thinking has to do with evaluating information that's fed to you and determining how you interpret it, what you believe, and whether something appears to be right or wrong. So in this style of thinking, the thinker employs reasoning to come to a conclusion about how he or she wants to perceive the information. information. In other words, it's about you looking at the information and saying, hey, do I deduce that this is actually right? Does this make sense for our business? So another way to look at this is, we use analytical thinking to figure out the solution to a complex question or to problem solve. But we use critical thinking to come up with what's a belief or perception that we have about something.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our rebroadcast today. For those of you who have inquired, here are courses related to this topic. I'll leave this up for just a moment here. You can also find more resources by visiting our website, cmcoutperform.com. Finally, here's the PDU information for those who require continued education credits for their PMI designations. And again, I'll leave this up just for a moment so you can record that info. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and that does conclude today's webinar. Have a great rest of your day.